advancing women in mathematics. Just one word of internal grateful. Nothing could have been done without the chair, Dr. Steve Cantrell, and without the manager of the mathematical department, Daniel Puerto. So thank you very much for doing everything to make this possible, and of course without any. I mean, the one thing which is also very nice here, it's a mathematics, it's Women in Mathematics project, but the whole university is supporting it. So we see the dean and the provost and the president, so that makes a good feeling, and we will make a difference. That's what I know for sure. Okay, and now it's my pleasure to introduce Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs and Provost, Jeffrey Dwerk. Dr. Dwerk is an accomplished engineer and scientist, a leading expert in biomedical imaging, especially magnetic resonance imaging, commonly known as MRI. He has published nearly 200 peer-reviewed scientific articles and has been awarded numerous National Institute of Health and industry-sponsored grants. Throughout his distinguished career, he has promoted many interdisciplinary research and educational initiatives. He holds more than 40 patents, and in 2017, he was inducted as a fellow into the National Academy of Inventors, which recognizes academic achievement, innovation, and scientific discovery.
Well, thanks, Mina, and thanks all of you for being here. And Mina recognized Steve and his efforts in putting together this conference, but I also want to recognize you and the other faculty and students and everyone here at the U who helped put this together as well as welcome all of you other international leaders here at to the University of Miami, and your commitment to advancing mathematics and women in mathematics. I think we all recognize that the more diverse opportunities we have, the better solutions we end up creating. And so thanks to all of you for being here to support this. When I look at our Institute for Mathematical Sciences in the Americas, I look back to soon after I came here working with Steve and Leonidas in creating this opportunity. It now has become one of the pillars of our University of Miami strategic plan, our Strat Plan 2.0, if you will. It will become one of the other institutes, along with our Institute for Chemistry and Molecular Science, the Institute for Data Science and Computing, and the Institute for Mathematical Sciences of the Americas will also be one of those pillars. And we look to you for advice and perspective on how we not only serve the women in mathematics, both here in the US and throughout the Americas, but also how can IMSA achieve its full potential. So I look forward to hearing the fruitful discussions that you all have in the course of the meetings here, and I want to welcome you. And I also want to congratulate you on this inaugural conference. It's not called the penultimate, it's the first of what will be many. And I look forward to having the opportunity, maybe in the future, spending more time actually within the scientific parts than I'll have today. But again, I just want to welcome all of you and thank you for your commitment to the mission of this particular program, for the WIMSA program, and for the Institute for Mathematical Sciences of America. It's my pleasure now to introduce Steve Cantrell, who's the chair of the Department of Mathematics, the director of IMSA, and he was actually also on the search committee that gave rise to me being here as your provost at the University of Miami. So if you have any complaints, be sure to bring them up with Steve. Please.
Thank you very much again. Thank you all for coming today. Let me start by saying a little bit about our initiative, Advancing Women in Mathematics Across the Americas, which we lovingly call WIMSA, which is led by our amazing Professor Mina Teicher, who came all the way from Israel to bring her vast expertise to bear on this outreach program. We envision our efforts as encouraging women and girls to quote unquote choose math at educational levels going all the way from high school through undergraduates, onto graduate school, postgraduate school, and into the professions. And let me just say that we are extraordinarily grateful at this point to the Schoenfeld Foundation for a very fine, very generous gift in support of our efforts here. Two of our programs have already started. One is called Math is for the Future. This concentrates on our female undergraduate majors with designated workshops, motivational events, and cohort building. The other that just started this fall is called Girls Are for STEM, and this is for female high school students. This term, we're offering them two different options for a 1-credit course. They come here once a week after school. We have 29 girls taking 33 classes, or 33 places in a class. And these students come from 5 surrounding schools of great variety, ranging from 2, 3 private schools, Ransom Everglades, Carrollton, St. Brendan's, but then also students from Palmetto and South Miami. So it's an increasingly diverse group of young ladies that are coming here. They are so bright-eyed and so eager, and they look like America, or look like Miami. So I'm very happy about that aspect of what we're doing. We will be inaugurating in the spring, bringing in some very high-level female mathematicians from Latin America to come spend a week, give a talk at IMSA, meet with students, serve as role models. And so I have a number of people I'd like to thank. Around the Girls Are for STEM, I want to thank the Division of Continuing and International Education, who worked with us to do this, because these are non-degree seeking students here. So, and then Dean Maria Stampino, who has been absolutely wonderful in helping me. She's been my raconteur and my confidant for several years, and she's wonderful. And then other people that have helped us going. I would also like to thank Claudia Grillo, Karina Alvarez, and Marianne Betcher in our Division of Development Alumni Relations, who have also been instrumental. They're all in to try to help math, and I'm enormously grateful for that. I would like now to recognize all of the speakers at this conference. And if I call your name and you're here, not everybody is here yet. If you'll stand and and we'll recognize everybody at the end. Erin Kobetz, our Vice Provost for Research. Felicia Nall, the Director of the Institute for the Advanced Study of the Americas. Nina Teichler, the leader of WIMSA. Eric Lundeitz from the Presentation of the Imaginary in Argentina. Miriam Stiefel, who is at Corona Institute at NYU and the Director of Math and Science at the Simons Foundation. He's here yet. Stanislaw Janicko, the Director of Center for Advanced Study in Poland. Rick Miranda, the President of Colorado State University. Then Lilach Avitan, who's computational neuroscience at Hebrew University in Israel. She's here right here in the front row. Then Gabrielle Lohman, the head of neuroinformatics at Max Planck Institute in Tübingen General Hospital in Germany. She'll be by June. Okay. Gabrielle Almeida Alvarez from Simba Mexico. He's also on the Scientific Advisory Committee for IMSA. Maribel Hernandez Rosales from Simba. Maria Chunovsky from the Math Department at Princeton. She's here. our amazing Ernesto Lugercio from WIMSA staff, also a member of our scientific advisory committee. Odilia Schwartz, our own from our Department of Computer Science, who will be talking on Wednesday. June Barra Green, the chair of the International Commission for the History of Mathematics at the Open University in the UK. Michael Friedman, the Cohn Institute for the History and Philosophy of Science at Tel Aviv in Israel. And last but definitely not least, Mamamet Gete Faken, who is the Vice Chancellor of the University of Cape Town in South Africa, who will be giving the last talk, which is entitled Math is Easy, Teaching It is Hard. So looking forward to that. I also like to make special recognition of both Dr. David Mangerscheid from the National Science Foundation and Dr. Yuri Schinkel from the Simons Foundation. It is now my pleasure to welcome Dr. Leonidas Bacchus, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, to say a few words.
Math is everywhere. Well, that's the title of your presentations today, tomorrow. But really, math changed my life. I don't know how many of you know of Hippocrates. Of course, I think you have heard about it. But in math, we celebrate another Hippocrates, Hippocrates of Chios, who was born a few kilometers away from where I was born. So early on in my life, I was fascinated with impossible problems, using a compass and a straight ruler to solve things like triangulation of an angle, possible to do. But I was most interested in something that Hippocrates did, which was creating a square that would have the same area as a circle. And indeed, he was able to solve the Hippocrates loom, which is creating a loom that is bounded by two arcs that has the same area as the triangle, which also proved that the area of the circle is equivalent to the square of its radius. So this is how I got so much excited when Nina came and said, I'm going to talk about grades to engage students, engage women about mathematics, because she got it. If you get something and excite people early on about things that may be relevant to them, they stay with them. It did stay with me. I ended up being a chemist, and I'm here to talk to you about it. So I'm very excited that we have students, we have faculty, professors from high school that come to us to learn about math, excited to keep them in math, and I'm really thankful for you coming here to talk about what excites you about math. And that's what I have to say. I'm looking forward to this discussion. So tomorrow, Mina, the floor is yours.
Today is a good day for me. I mean, the dean said that he's excited about math is everywhere. What can I ask for more in this conference? I'm very grateful for all the remarks and everything you say. We formally starting at 2:20, always at 2:30. It's not always easy to have measure the time for greeting. So I have a few minutes that I will, I don't want to start before because sometimes people come especially for a lecture, so I don't want to start a lecture before the time, but I didn't think that I would have extra more minutes to tell you about why and how WIMSA, but I have these few minutes, so I'm just using it unprepared. How did it all started for me? In the break, I just mentioned that actually I started to mentor women when I was 9 years old. The neighbor came to me and she said, you know, my daughter is 8 and she's not good in arithmetic. Can you help her a little bit? Because she's really not good in that. So I started to help her, and soon I realized she's not good. She's good. She just didn't have the right attitude. You know, there's always the difference between algebra and geometry, and some people better in algebra, some people better in geometry. So she was tested in the wrong time. So after a few weeks, she was on her own. So I was very happy about it. But all my life, I was mentoring and promoting women, even when I didn't understand that that's what I was doing. I always did it as a side job. I was always, when I was a student, in a math male-dominated class, I always looked for the women that said, is it for us? I said, yeah, of course it's for you. And then also later, when I was a PhD, and then PhD, when I became a professor, the young people, etc., I always tried. Some of the people, like, they don't need that encouragement, some of the women. Some people leave mathematics for the wrong reason. And when you are 16 years old and you leave mathematics, you close your option for the future. There is no second chance. You know, you close the door and many doors are going to be closed for you. Many opportunities, employment opportunities, many directions, you are closing doors. I don't say to 16 years old girl, not in Israel, not in China, not in Texas, wherever I did it, certainly not in Miami, you must study mathematics. What we do in the school around, we just take the girls that are good in mathematics and we are helping them to keep with it. Because if you're good in language, if you're good in art, if you're good in anything, you'll be a happy person. You have to do what you are good in it. Then you are happy. When you're happy and you're good in it, you succeed and you give a lot of contribution to the country. But if you're good in mathematics, it doesn't mean that you're also good in something else, and you drop out of mathematics because it's considered socially not acceptable that girls are doing mathematics. People are expecting something else. So when people are expecting something else, the girls are dropping. And in Israel, it started when the chief of staff came to me in a time when I was chief scientist. So he came to me and he said, we don't have enough people for the cyber unit in the army. And in Israel, the cyber unit is survival. So we must have enough people for cyber unit. And every boy that got enough grades in mathematics in high school went to the cyber unit. That was for sure. But there were many girls, so the only place to get more people were the girls. So I started a big campaign, and within a couple of years, we raised the number from 12% to 25%. So we doubled the number of women there. And of course, it's extremely beneficial for the women. Some of my nieces there, you come out of it, you can go to a startup, you have a good start to your career. In Miami, there is no cyber unit of the army that you can attract the people to go to. So we have to invent different ways to attract the girls, not to go into mathematics if you don't like it. I all the time stressing to stay in mathematics if you like it. And I know that some of the girls are dropping out at age 16 because they think that the boys don't like girls. Girls are nerds if they are doing mathematics. They prefer to be socially popular and be invited to a class. So when I say that, you know, on one hand, you want to be popular and be invited to dance. On the other hand, you have a chance to be CEO of Microsoft. So when you are 16, CEO of Microsoft on one way and getting invited to dance by the coolest boy in class, there is no way that she would choose CEO of Microsoft. She knows what she wants. So I tell them, you don't tell me the real reason that you are dropping, but I know the real reason that you are dropping. You are dropping because you think that this is being nerd, and you think that boys don't like you. So I've been in your age. I'm good in mathematics. I've been, and I can tell you personally that you are right. The boys don't like nerd girls when they're 16. But just hold in there for 2 years, and you go to college in all these male-dominated fields, and there are 10 boys on every girl. You can choose the best looking guy, the guy that's going to be a superstar, the astronaut, the high-tech guy, the exit guy, the CEO of Microsoft men, if we allow them also. So they're all laughing about it. But this is a moment that if they break out at that moment, then it's out. Of course, there are other reasons that the problem. Some schools, they don't encourage enough the girls to go. And this, I will not go into personal stories, but you will hear about it. So there are many other issues that are not prevent girls from using all the talents that they have. And that's what we want, not to waste your talent. Moreover, as kids, mathematics, unlike other fields, you don't need emotional maturity. So you can find talented girls in a remote village in Siberia and in the center of Miami or in New York and in the Midwest somewhere. Mathematical talent is growing like inside you from young age. While if you want to encourage people to do writing or to do languages or art or music, culture and maturity is important. So that's why we are starting with Girls Are for STEM, because we all know that in the beginning of elementary school, the girls are as good as the boys in mathematics, and sometimes so something happens and that's social. So that was my mission, and I say again that it's very nice that it's a university mission in Miami. It's not a math department, it's not me individual. University, everybody in the university understand to make a difference. It will make a difference to the life of the girls, will make a difference to the university. There already been girls that transferred this year, senior girl and junior transferred from other university here because they heard that Miami is good for mathematics for women last year. It's good for the state because the state wants to be and the county wants to be a high-tech center. And it's good for the United States. You cannot have always counting on immigration to do a lot of the work. You have to have a solid base of mathematics and then get all these very clever and innovative immigrants to come. But you have to have a solid education for the local people. So I had the chance suddenly to give my mission, and we wait 1 minute, and then we will, you have 1 minute to relax, and then we will start 2 minutes. Introduce Dr. Erin Kobetz. She is the Vice Provost. She's Dr. Erin Kobetz is Vice Provost for Research and Professor at the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine. She's a scientist of international reputation, the Director of Population Sciences and Cancer Disparity at Sylvester, and recently presented with the John K. and Judy H. Schulte Senior Endowed Chair in Cancer Research. Her research interest includes cancer, obviously, and social ecological approach to research and intervention and community engagement. She will share with us policy and personal aspects of women in science. Please.
Am I on the camera? Okay. This is going to be very hard for me because I'm not somebody who ever stands still. Oh, microphone, you can't hear me. Can you hear me now? Okay. So I'm in the right place and I have volume, so that's a win. So thank you so much, Mina, for the opportunity to be here. My name is Erin Kobetz. I'm the university's Vice Provost for Research and Scholarship, and I am a terrible mathematician. And, you know, when Mina asked me to give this talk, I actually chuckled out loud. Never thought in my entire career that I would be given the honor to speak about women in math. And here's why. I was somebody in high school who struggled pretty significantly with my AP calculus class. I actually had a math teacher who publicly told the class, and I think me specifically, that I should never pursue a career in math or science, that this wasn't for women, and that if I really wanted to do something oriented to math and science, I might be better trying to teach about it, that she actually doubted my ability to be successful in that profession either. And, you know, one of the things that I reflect on a lot in my career, and it's actually the advice that I give all of my mentees, is that when somebody tells you no, maybe it's an opportunity to reframe it as a yes. So it wasn't that I was bad at math. I actually hadn't found the math that spoke to me. And it wasn't until college and graduate school where I learned the wonderful world of statistics and probability and everything started to feel natural, as if I had always needed to be doing that. Because as I was doing my doctoral work, I was taking these high level statistical courses, learning about different types of modeling, multi-level modeling, in fact, where I was trying to control for ecologic error in looking at social determinants and their impact on individual health, that I realized that, in fact, I had always been a mathematician. Because what it wasn't my ability to do calculus. It was about my ability to frame questions in a way that invited curiosity and using a particular methodology by which to solve for persistent problems for which there were no known answers. The funny thing about that math teacher, for those of you who are not from Miami, you may not appreciate that Miami is the biggest, smallest city ever. And I'm actually a Miami native. I was recruited back to the university by Jerry Goodwin, who was the Cancer Center director about 18 years ago. I had just finished my PhD at UNC Chapel Hill, and Jerry wanted me to develop a program in cancer disparities. And in that work, I got to be very familiar with some of the donors for the Cancer Center. And there's one group in particular, and I'm looking at Amy in the back because she actually used to work closely with this group, called the Women's Cancer Association. And they're a group of local women who are very committed to raising dollars to support Sylvester's research mission. And in fact, they've, I think, endowed, millions of dollars over the lifetime of their organization. And as a woman in science, they often like me to come speak to them about my work. So one day I'm giving a talk to the Women's Cancer Association about my research in cervical cancer, and particularly in Little Haiti, the largest enclave patient settlement in the United States. And when it's time for questions, a woman jumps up and she says, "Oh my God, Erin, do you remember me? I'm your math teacher." And it took me a second because she had aged, and she was that very math teacher who had told me never to pursue a career in science and math. And so I offer that as a bit of a parable to the fact that people don't always know what you're capable of. And if you listen to their no, perhaps it turns you away from what the potential of who you can be. And I think this is really particularly important for women in math and science, because many of us, even now, to Mina's point, still hear no far too often. And as I was thinking about preparing for this talk and sharing that story, I started to reflect on my career a little bit more broadly. When I had been told no in other spaces where, had I leaned into that advice, I probably wouldn't be standing here today. So when I was recruited to Miami, and Leonidas has heard this story, the Cancer Center director said, "I want you to develop a program of cancer disparities. I want you to identify why certain groups of individuals are at increased risk of developing and dying of cancer. And I want you to approach understanding the complex etiology of this problem from a multi-level orientation. Go." Now, I was straight out of a PhD. That was a ridiculous goal for him to set. And I was undaunted because what he was asking me to do really resonated for my passion around why I got into science in the first place. I'm a Miami native, but I hadn't lived here for about 16 years at the time. And so undertook a mapping exercise to appreciate the geographic distribution of cancer disparity throughout the Miami metropolitan area. And I was really focused on cervical cancer because that's an objective marker of health disparity. When we see an excess incidence of this particular disease, it really speaks to the failure of the healthcare system to provide equitable opportunities for disease prevention. And my mapping exercise revealed clusters, areas where there was a higher than expected observed incidence of cervical cancer. In fact, one of the incidences that I found was 4 times higher than anywhere else in the state of Florida, and really rivaled what had been reported for the developing world. And so I thought that this was statistical artifact, because at this time I was really leaning into my math flex. And I assumed that there were too few women living in this area that it was like swampland. You know how that is in Miami? For those of you who live here, like one moment you're in a developed area and the next moment you're in like swamp. So I assumed that there were more alligators than women living there. And so my rate was artificially inflated. The beautiful thing about maps though, is they allow you to focus in and cross streets. And that's what I did. And I got in my car and drove and very quickly realized that I was in the ethnic enclave of Little Haiti, which is a federally designated medically underserved area, which means that there's a shortage of primary care providers within this area to meet the health needs of the community, not just in terms of cancer prevention broadly. And this particular neighborhood is less than 5 miles from the Miller School of Medicine. The only reason I knew it was Little Haiti was the predominance of signs in a language other than English or Spanish. So I went back to the School of Medicine and tried to convince my senior colleagues, the majority of whom were men, about doing collaborative translational research to understand this excess incidence of cervical cancer in Little Haiti. And they told me no. And the rationale for no, I think, was arguably in my best career interests. They felt that if I were to pursue this line of inquiry, that it would very much affect my tenurability and that I would be going down sort of a scientific rabbit hole for which there may not be the necessary output by which somebody like my career is evaluated, publications, grants, etc. And I kind of remember that math teacher and decided they were going to say no. And I was naive and perhaps egotistical enough to not care that there was a way to accomplish both of those things and to embrace the power of and or the dialectic. I could worry about my career, and I could also not turn up an opportunity and obligation to pursue inquiry to understand why the Haitian diaspora community was developing and dying of cervical cancer in an extraordinary way. So I went back to Little Haiti and really started knocking on the doors of community members whose names I had identified with a phone book, right? This is like 18 years ago. There was no Google. There was AOL Instant Messenger, which I was not particularly proficient at. And they also told me no. So when I started knocking on doors of people whose names I had identified, wearing my white coat, introducing myself as Dr. Erin Kobetz from the University of Miami, interested in doing research on HPV and cervical cancer, I made a lot of mistakes. So the no that they told me wasn't about my ability. It was about the need to step back and to understand what I was trying to pursue and with whom and for what end. So what I hadn't appreciated was that in the early days of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, Haitian ancestry was erroneously labeled as a risk factor for transmission by the Centers for Disease Control. So when we didn't call it HIV/AIDS, when we called it gay-related infectious disease, the Centers for Disease Control suggested that there were 4 risk factors, all of which started with age. Homosexuals, heroin drug users, hemophiliacs, and Haitians. I think we all know that that was a function of correlation, not causation, right? But the way that that research was manipulated by the media led to the legitimized discrimination of a group of people who are already very much living on the margins. And so when I showed up and I introduced myself as Erin Kobetz from the University of Miami, I unwittingly had brought with me all of the university's baggage, even if I wasn't part of creating it. Why? Because the research that documented the increased prevalence of this GRID among the Haitian community came from the University of Miami. The research wasn't bad. It was really good epidemiology. What was problematic was that my colleagues before me collected the data and then never showed back up into the community to think collaboratively about what to do with the findings. They're parachute scientists. And when that kind of research happens over and over again, we ingrain a deep skepticism about science and its benefit for community health. So when the community told me no, they were saying no to the kind of science that had historically been done by the university, us versus them, and saying, go back to the drawing board. Think about how we do this differently. And so I leaned into a methodology called community-based participatory research, which invites community members to the table. So the people who would be researched become researchers, and you bridge this chasm, this power dynamic that historically has existed between researchers and communities. And together, we decided what work to pursue and how to best answer the questions so that they resonated with cultural and linguistic barriers to disease prevention. So I tell you this because had I listened to those no's, the no's of my senior colleagues and of the initial community members with whom I encountered, the story I tell you would be entirely different. So, you know, when I think about young women in math and science, and I'm actually the mother of a 16-year-old who wants to be a pediatric oncologist, supposedly, I tell her, do not let other people's constraints define you and your ability. You can find math hard and still you can be successful. And you can be somebody like me who needed to find the right type of math in order for me to be able to see the world through the lens of these complex equations that actually never resonated with me until I started modeling. And so, you know, I hope that forums like this provide a platform for women and men and non-binary individuals to conceptualize what they can be beyond the boundaries that are often imposed on us and for us. We can define who we want to be and use tools like math to help establish the credibility that's necessary for us to have presence in the discipline or field in which we're choosing. So going back to that little Haiti story, I kept going back to the community. I was annoying. I showed up like for things that had nothing to do with science. And I refused to take no for an answer. And eventually over time, people, I think, believed that my heart was in the right place, that I was coming to do research that was collaborative, and that I was going to allow their voice and ideas to shape the future of the science that we might pursue collaboratively. And we built what we call a campus community advisory board. It was actually the first one ever at the University of Miami, where we brought key stakeholders together from Little Haiti with multidisciplinary faculty from the University of Miami. And together we decided what we wanted to study. And the first thing we wanted to understand was, are Haitian women being screened for cervical cancer in the same rates as other Black women in the Miami metropolitan area? And you're probably thinking like, well, what's so groundbreaking about that? Well, in public health, we have a really nasty habit of lumping all people with one shared race or ethnicity together for surveillance purposes. And when we do that, we mask really important heterogeneity that exists within those groups with regard to genetics, behavior, environmental exposure, and it precludes our ability to understand who within a group is actually driving disparity and then to target limited resources appropriately. That's a big deal. And so my team was one of the first teams to ever pursue that kind of science where we said, we're going to not lump everybody together who self-identifies as Black. We're going to unstratify, and we're going to look at this variability and we're going to measure it. And it was really important that we did that work, because what we came to find is when you looked at Blacks as a whole for Miami-Dade County, their cervical cancer screening practices actually outpaced those of their white counterparts. But when you looked within the group, you saw that Haitian American women were significantly less likely to report a history of ever being screened or screening once every 3 years, which at the time was the endorsed interval for disease prevention by the United States Preventive Services Task Force. That's a big deal. And that's only possible through math, right? And through conceptualizing data in different ways. Now, what ended up happening was the community said, okay, we're not being screened, and what do we do about it? And so it started this journey of thinking strategically about how to build the necessary infrastructure to close gaps in screening in ways that resonated with the cultural preferences of this particular community. So what I wanted to do was build a free clinic. What my community partners told me was that if I did that, no one would come. And that's why this kind of community-based participatory research is so extraordinarily important, because sometimes we think we know, and we only know from our limited vantage point. There's a world of competing truths. And in order to advance change, it's important at the very least to acknowledge those different truths and figure out how to work within them. So Haitian women, even if I opened a free clinic, we're never going to get a pap smear. Why? Well, because one, there wasn't a Creole word for cervix. So it was very hard to actually discuss cervical cancer without the appropriate nomenclature, right? Two, women believe that when the speculum, which is necessary in order to visualize the cervix as part of a gynecologic exam, was introduced into the vagina, it changed its tone of rigidity in such a way that women would never be sexually desirable to their male partners on whom they were economically dependent. And so then you move from an issue of what you think is access to something that's far more complicated. And my community partners didn't say no, they said yes and figure it out. So what ended up happening was we were the first group to ever take a self-sampler that allows a woman to self-collect cervical cells in the privacy of her own home from a clinic to a community. And we used community health workers who are lay women, indigenous to Little Haiti, with limited formal education, because that's what the community said yes to. The community health workers took those devices into their very large social networks and identified those who were unscreened or underscreened, which was nearly everyone. And we were able to provide the proof of principle. And what this did was it became a ripple effect. So we started with self-sampling for HPV, but now community health workers are armed with point of care tests for HIV, colorectal cancer screening, skin cancer screening, hepatitis C testing. And then there's even other innovation that occurs with colleagues such as Sylvia Donnard in molecular biology and biochemistry, where we even innovate on the self-samplers themselves by creating point of care tests that allows the community health workers to process the test in a woman's home, as opposed to needing to take it to a traditional laboratory where there may be significant delays and loss to follow-up. Now I'm going to go back to my central thesis because I think I'm running out of time. I see that my colleague Felicia Knowles walked in the room and I want to be mindful. Hi. Oh, I have time? Okay. But I also wanted to open it up for questions because I think what happens in a lot of these presentations is you get somebody like me who speaks at you as opposed to having the opportunity for dialogue. And in my role as vice provost, I think where I learn best is in speaking to all of you about the barriers and impediments that you encounter in trying to pursue your work and also to inspire the next generation of mathematicians to pursue theirs. So I go back to this idea of no, and that I never see a closed door. When I fail, I see it as an opportunity. When a door closes, I see it as an opportunity. And I think that if we were to start to teach more of our children that, we might expand the potential of what we could accomplish individually and collectively. Because our greatest creativity actually comes from having to solve complicated problems that maybe fall outside the scope of what we inherently know, but force us to think differently about what to do. So when the Haitian community said, we want to self-sample, we want to self-collect ourselves, it meant engaging engineers. to come up with a self-sampler that would be easy to use and cheap to produce and could reach the cervix and could collect sufficient cells so that we could process them for HPV, the principal cause of cervical cancer. I think when I've heard no in my life, it's really made me think about how to become more resolute about what I do and what my purpose is. My purpose is really being an advocate for health equity. And I keep that at the forefront of everything I do, even in my role as vice provost. It's why I do this work, right? Because I'm the first female vice provost. Now we have my colleague, Kathy Kerr, in the back. But like before me, there was never a female vice provost at the University of Miami, particularly one who was overseeing the entire research enterprise. So maybe we've come a really long way. And maybe it's a moment when you have 2 women vice provosts to think about how we start changing the narrative from gender as a barrier to gender as something that teaches resilience and expands potential. And if I'm completely honest about why I took this job, Jeff's not sitting here, but he would tell you this story. When he called me and asked me to be the vice provost, I actually laughed and I hung up the phone. I thought that it was a joke. I'd never met him. So when he called and said, would you like to be the vice provost for research? Like, I really thought that I was getting punked. Do you remember that show on MTV where like somebody would do something ridiculous to see how you responded? And then he called back and he said, no, this is really Jeffrey Dirk, the provost of the university. I'd like to be able to speak to you about this opportunity. And the more I listened, my internal reaction was actually F no. Like, what am I doing? Like, why would I ever consider this? Like, there's so much autonomy and opportunity in doing my science and working with communities and other colleagues across disciplinary boundaries to solve these really important issues in health equity. And then the more I thought about it and my actual reaction to the idea no, I started to convince myself that it was really a chance to say yes. And part of the reason, probably the biggest reason I said yes, was because the best way to teach young women that their potential is limitless is to see an actual example of somebody who's doing that. So if I become the shoulder that other young women stand on to elevate their careers and to pursue science and scholarship that transcends the possibility of what any of us in this room in this moment think is possible, it was worth saying yes. 100% was worth saying yes. And so thank you for this opportunity. I am happy to answer questions about anything you want to talk about, whether it be as being vice provost, what I like to do in statistics. Don't ask me to program anything anymore. It's been a really long time. I've hired people who do that for me. But I'm happy to have a conversation for the last little bit of time so that I can better appreciate how I can support what you're trying to accomplish. Because when you do great things in WIMSA, Women in Math, right? WIMSA, I'm not always good with acronyms, I'm sorry. The rest of us do good things, but it's because you're creating the groundwork, the roadmap for women to change the world. And I hate to be like kind of silly and say it, but the future is female. And I'm sure there will be many other people who come behind me who don't have to say that they're the first, because that's not acceptable. And we need to continue to break through ceilings so that our voices and our ideas and our lived experiences can authentically be at the table, because it matters. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. You are an absolute role model. And we know that for advancement of gender, as you say, the young people need to see role models. So you are the best. I have many questions, but I'll let the audience start. If there's any question.
Yes.
From Colorado State, the provost and
The
all vice
president
provosts.
of Colorado.
The provost and all vice provosts are with state currently.
That's awesome.
But my serious question is, it's not really a question, observation. In the West, we have exactly the same community-based research issues, tribal based. Many of our faculty work on pine ridge conservation in South Dakota and Wind River in Wyoming or the Navajo Nation in Mexico. What you described working in the Haitian community here is exactly the issues that we face working with the tribal communities, indigenous peoples out of the Northwest area. We're hiring just now, finish the interviews, we're hiring an associate vice president for indigenous and Native American here, specifically to make sure we do that well, if that is.
Well, you can tell them to call me if they ever have questions. I mean, the Haitian community is a story that I tell because it's the one that owns my heart, and because Felicia and Jeff are in this room, and I've had the privilege of doing a lot of that work with them and with colleagues in what my children affectionately call Big Haiti, not just Little Haiti. But I can't imagine doing science any other way beyond that, which is stakeholder engaged. And interestingly, when you're talking about role models, so on Friday, I briefed the White House moonshot team, and my daughter said, "You're such a boss," which, you know, when she's 16, it's not like a lot of really nice things come out of her mouth. But I took that as like this indication that like I'm doing something right, like the way that I'm showing up, the fact that I'm asked to go brief this team on cancer means to her that I have legitimacy. The story I was telling at the White House was actually not about Little Haiti. It was about firefighters. So interestingly, about 8 years ago, I got a phone call from a firefighter who asked me if I would do research with him. And I was like, what? He was like, we're dying of cancer. And I was like, and why am I your person? And he said, because we know what you did in Little Haiti. And if you can work in Little Haiti, then you can certainly work amongst our ranks, which similarly have tremendous skepticism about both cancer. I mean, there was a ton of pervasive silence that cancer was an occupational illness, and also around research and whether participating in research would somehow compromise their employment, right? Because in the state of Florida, as an example, you can't smoke and be a firefighter. There's legislative policy that precludes that. You also can't do cancer research and not ask somebody if they smoke. And so they were worried that if they were to disclose that we would potentially have to share that with, you know, their chief, and that would affect their ability to stay on staff, on task. That work has become the biggest privilege of my career. And it is true citizen science in that the firefighters actually are able to articulate the questions that they think need to be asked, which is true community-based participatory research. Unlike Little Haiti, where we went and kind of showed data and they gave us ideas and we tried to map those ideas onto research questions that were fundable. In the firefighter story, perhaps because they're not as marginalized, they were able to ask the questions. And so the work is the best example of translational research that I've ever seen, where it goes from PDX mouse models, where we've embedded mice with tumors from firefighters and able to identify their specific mutations and link them back to environmental exposures, to policy change. And as an example of policy change, there's an international agency for research on cancer that makes determinations about whether something is a carcinogen. This year, they reconvened to talk about firefighting as an occupational carcinogen. And it went from a class 2B, which means there's equivocal evidence, to a class 1, which means that they consider firefighting now to be the same as tobacco smoke and UV exposure. 30% of the science that made that determination came from the University of Miami. And it would have never happened had we not been participatory in our approach and allowed the firefighters to help guide the way that we ask questions and build consensus around the idea that science was a vehicle for action. And so I wish your person a lot of luck. Colorado is really my happy place. I probably shouldn't admit that. We are actually, that self-sampler that I mentioned got institutionalized in a number of outreach vehicles that are supported by the Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center. And interestingly enough, that was a note too. I almost quit my job over the cancer center director not willing to give me a vehicle because it was $500,000. And I made the case, well, but you wouldn't sneeze at $500,000 for like genome sequencing. And then I backed him into a corner, but he was saying no. Those vehicles have become like part of how Sylvester differentiates itself in the network of National Cancer Institute centers. And most of the centers, since we were designated, have each bought what they call game changer vehicles, which come from Miami. Our self-sampler is institutionalized on that because we did the whole research to show that it's just as efficacious as a pap smear. So any woman who's unscreened or underscreened can come get a self-sampler for free. Anyway, the third of these vehicles is being built in Colorado. And so the team, actually, the facilities team reached out to me last week and they're like, so who's gonna go check on the vehicle? I was like, really? When is it ready? January? Can we push it to the end of January? Me. So thank you for being here and for that comment. And more institutions will have to do that because if we want to solve for health equity, we need to make sure that the voices of people who contribute to excess inequity are meaningfully represented in science and scholarship. So that's very progressive and I applaud that.
Have more time.
Well, I'm Bernardo here from. I've had in the last year some experience with the politics, personal business. And I have found all these years in Germany and Colombia, oncologists don't explain anything. That they just simply tell you what to do. And if you don't do it, they start about telling all the things that will happen if you don't do what they say. Or you went over this determination, never explaining people what they're having.
I think that's a really good point.
Sorry,
No, I think that's a really good point. And there's like a little bit of a personal anecdote, which I normally don't talk about in a scientific presentation. When I was recruited to UM, 6 weeks into my faculty job, I was diagnosed with cancer. And I had the very experience that you're speaking of, where everybody told me, like, you're going to be fine. What are you worried about? This is what you do, and then you'll be fine. And I wasn't fine. Like, emotionally, spiritually, I wasn't fine. And the lack of empathy in their directive was very challenging, particularly because many of these individuals were the colleagues who recruited me to the university to study a cancer that it seemed that their medical management of was lacking. And I think many of us who have been patients can speak to the fact that there's sometimes a pretty tenable gap in the way that physicians speak to patients or we as scientists speak to lay audiences. So 2 things on that. One, because of my own personal experience, when I went into Little Haiti, I went with a very different mindset. I mean, one, I had been told no, that I was never going to get tenured, ever. And I wasn't convinced that I would live long enough to get tenured. So I was kind of like bold and brazen, and also realized that the more vulnerable I was in my interactions, the more people saw me as one of them and not part of the university. So I had a neck cancer, and you can't see it now, but I used to have this like nasty scar that runs from side to side. And it was red and it was angry. And it looked literally like someone pulled me out of the guillotine, like just in time. And so I wear a scarf, and Kathy always wears them, but back then it was not cool. And I didn't pull it off quite as well as you did. So I would take off this scarf in Miami in August, and people would be like, what happened? And they would see the scar. And I'd say, oh, I'm being treated for cancer. And in those conversations, I learned how to speak like a person. And one of the things that we're doing in my office, it's not been made public yet, is exactly that kind of training. So you just solve like the most important problem in chemistry ever. Like, how does this matter to like real people? Why do they care? How do you give an elevator pitch in 3 minutes where someone understands what you do, why you do it, and why it matters? So we need more of that, not just oncology, but in science and medicine generally, the ability to talk both across disciplines and across communities, so that we understand our commonality as opposed to the differences that continue to separate us. And you're right. I mean, I learned from personal experience, but as I was walking in, somebody was texting me, my doctor said this, and so then I have to call the physician and have a conversation about how we have real dialogue around it. Anyway. Oh.
All the questions are from our, it's very great because now that we speak about two words, I can see the many possibilities of interaction. That was very fast, energetic with the pandemic. Using data science, actually things that on this health next. So, so I think that I like to ask you very nice questions. One is there a role for big data and data science?
Yes.
And more, even more like conversation. What are the real chances within a foreseeable future for these? The forms of dreams, very high tech, that kind of thing.
I feel like someone planted you in the audience. The big data is actually really my love. And you know, like I said, I love math, I love modeling, I love big data, and I'm always looking to create. So I think many of you know, I mean, at least the university of Miami, that I ran our COVID response. The way that we did that, right? Like I worked with colleagues across the institution to merge data sets that had never spoken to each other, so that we could see the 180-degree view of what was happening in any real time, and then really deploy the best of our technology in that moment to try to offset the potential of further transmission. In my work in the Cancer Center, and I'd be happy to speak about this further, I built something that we call family safety that allows us to understand cancer risk and outcome across multiple levels of geography in relation to environmental, behavioral, and other social determinants of health. And not only does it allow you to visualize these histologic relationships, to think about where there may be a need for primary inquiry, there's obviously all of the data that support those visualizations, which is only novel in that most of these data sets have been siloed from one another, and we figured out the way to integrate them through using geography as a common element. And I would love to work with any of you on this, because there's so much potential, and we do like lots of small area estimations, and even thinking about how you calculate something like years of potential life loss on a census plate.
How can you use your data?
It's pretty neat. And it also helps with the cancer registry reports. So like, you know, so I'm also pushing the boundaries there all the time, being like, oh, well, we need to integrate social determinants. We need to integrate whole genome sequencing from tumors. And we're going to have big data, and I'm happy to come talk to you guys about that. I love that. In terms of Elizabeth Holmes, the other role that I've kind of gotten like smushed into, and I say smush because I generally feel very triangulated in this space, is thinking about innovation as the president's fourth vertical for innovation, which he unveiled, I think, that his presidential roadmap, and how we go from discovery to delivery and create an entrepreneurial ecosystem where us as faculty don't only think about peer-reviewed publication at the endpoint, but think about commercial opportunity, think about gaps in the market and how we can fill that through our scientific output, and more importantly, creating an opportunity, given the Miami moment, to work collaboratively with the startups that are populating our region and allowing them to borrow our expertise to advance their commercial agenda and drive our science. So Elizabeth Holmes is a fraud, but I do think that there are a lot of really smart minds out there who will change the scope of what's possible. And it starts with not listening to them. Anyway, thank you.
Very much. You know, this exchange is really a demonstration of the era of the 21st century. We say medicine and data science and statistics and psychology and public health and education all come together to do what you all want, what do you want. And this is a message. It's an example, but it's a message that that's what we have to do. We cannot go further in science and development if we don't collaborate and listen to other people from other sectors. So mathematicians need to talk to everybody, and medicine people need to talk to everybody in order to make a progress. And so any other, I have another remark.
Just a shameless plug.
Yes, please.
Oh, sorry, just a shameless plug, ULink, which, really supports the interdisciplinary collaboration across the university. The next call is going to be on dissemination, implementation, and commercialization. I think there's a real place for mathematicians there. And we are collaborating with MIA, the Miami Institute for the Americas, and the Hemispheric University Consortium to make sure that the work is not just locally relevant, but also can leverage the expertise of our global partners to pursue questions in the space of health and climate resilience that have broader scale of applicability. Sorry.
I'm going to ask something different, but I think it's like that was very inspiring, and I'm just like, if there were many girls here like this studying and standing up, but we also face other barriers, right? Like once we are more women, these skills that are really competed by men, we have also the like all the bullying and harassment, and it's been very difficult to implement that deal with such cases. So I was wondering like whether you have experience well or I mean I know that this topic is like
No. I think it's I think it's an important topic, and I thought about discussing that, and I also thought about discussing the morning that I had this morning, which I think is part of being a woman with children and having these sort of like dual, often competing responsibilities. I think I was telling Kathy that my youngest child was feigning appendicitis this morning. And I knew he was feigning appendicitis because my husband is a GI doctor, but he was already down at the hospital scoping patients. But his commitment to that, let's call it lie, over going to school, sent me to the doctor's office for what would be 4 hours. And 4 hours in my day literally equates to what might be 10 meetings that now all have to be rescheduled. So I was thinking about talking about that. Harassment is a real issue, and I don't think we talk about it openly enough, and particularly in forums like this. I don't think there's probably any woman, or maybe man in this room, who could say that they haven't experienced some level of harassment. It doesn't necessarily have to be sexual, but some level of harassment as part of their career development. I laugh because when I was really junior faculty, and I was young when I started, I was 29, there were male colleagues who would introduce me saying, "This is Dr. Kobetz, and you believe brains come in this package." People in positions of like authority. People who like I didn't feel readily able to challenge. Because if I were to bring it up, and this was before the days of Chain Watch, where like I could have done so anonymously, it would have been their word and their power and their authority over mine. And that's hard because it made it a very uncomfortable place in which to work, and also set a standard where I felt like I had to prove myself more than some of my male colleagues who were actually doing far less, but maybe were being evaluated on different criteria because I didn't fit, I guess, the physical mold of what many scientists do. So what I say is, one, I have an open door policy. That is the truth. And many of you have come to me. You can text me, you can call me, you can show up, it'll stay confidential. If I don't know what's happening, I can't help solve for it. But part of the way that we address harassment is to be open about it, to be transparent about it, and to make sure that it doesn't continue to persist in ways that are deleterious to your and other people's career. Because when we let that stuff fester, maybe somebody who wasn't as, I don't want to say strong, but maybe somebody who wasn't me would have decided to leave or to not put up with it. Maybe somebody who's not you would make a similar choice. We don't want other people's bad behavior to determine the potential of anybody else. So please, if you email me, my cell phone is in my signature. That's intentional. People text me all the time. It's actually like my count. I'm pretty convinced. I'm like, short of Felicia, I might be the best texter, not Nina, right? Like, if you text me, I will answer. If there's a problem, come to me. Let's figure out how to solve for it together. Nobody should have to suffer in silence. And it's only when we speak truth that we create the possibility of a harassment-free environment. I'm telling you, people used to introduce me like that, and it's not an exaggeration. People who I still have to see.
You touched two issues, the Me Too issue that I want to put aside here, otherwise we will not go to them. And the other one is the fact that women have to do better in order to get to the same position. And this, you have statistics that shows it, you have personal stories, you have moves from elite universities, like even the Hebrew University statistics on how many papers a woman has when she gets a full professor compared to how many papers a man has. So if I say the statistics say that the Hebrew University twice as much, they, oh, the women are better. I say, no, they could get full professor 5 years before them. But people like you, the role models like you and role models that we have in the audience might have a chance to change it.
I
So,
hope so.
I
I wouldn't have said yes. to
And
this
our
position,
young girl,
no.
the young girl that we are talking to in the high schools and in the undergraduate girls, they will have, I hope, I'm almost sure they will have a better future if they will look at us and they will learn how to help, how to work and how to progress in a male-dominated workplace, which mostly they are. It's so interesting. So even though the time is over, maybe Felisa will allow us another 5 minutes if there is another question, and if not, we will thank you very much. I hope you allow me to use the video of your talk for encouragement and show it to my girls. That's how I call them, my girls. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.